Hello, hello, and welcome to another edition of Breakdown with the American Legislative Exchange Council. I'm Lars Staleside, and with me today is the Director of ALEC's Tax and Fiscal Policy Task Force, Nick Stark. And he's here to discuss TABOR, the Taxpayers Bill of Rights. Nick, welcome to Breakdown.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm sure a lot of people out there are saying, what the heck is TABOR and how does it apply to me? So what is TABOR?
Yeah, so if you're not a Coloradan, you don't really know, you might not even know what TABOR is. Some Coloradans don't even know what TABOR is, apart from they sometimes get these magical checks in their direct deposit or in the mail that give them a refund every year. TABOR is the Taxpayers Bill of Rights that basically says government can't grow by a certain percentage every year. And there's a formula for how that percentage is calculated and everything.
And you say that's government cannot grow.
Government spending cannot grow.
Okay.
Yeah. So it puts a cap on how much government spending can grow. And in addition to that, tax revenues. And it says basically once you hit that cap, you can't increase your spending based on just laws that you passed. You can't garner more tax revenue because of that. Basically, you have to spend within your means.
That sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing, which is sort of surprising that a government would pass such a thing, being that it's reasonable.
Yeah, well, so this goes back a couple decades, 30 years. We celebrated the 30th anniversary last year in November of the Taxpayers Bill of Rights being passed on the ballot in Colorado.
Okay.
And basically what you had is in the mid to late 80s and early 90s, you had a really good fiscally responsible legislature in Colorado that put several things on the ballot, including I think they cut and flattened the tax rate out there. But one of the other things they put on there was TABOR, and it does just that. They said future generations might not be as fiscally responsible as we are, so we've got to cap that. We've got to make sure that there's restraints to keep the size of government down.
So I talk about some foresight, thinking that there's a chance that future politicians might not want to spend within their limits.
Yeah, well, and the joke we always say around here, particularly in relation to Congress, is what's the difference between a drunken sailor and Congress? Well, a drunken sailor stops when the money runs out, right? Or stops spending when the money runs out. And you can say that the same logic applies to politicians that really want to expand government and their programs and their spending. They don't necessarily stop when the money runs out. So it's a good check on that.
Okay, so I was actually, when I knew we were going to do this particular interview, I reached out to a few friends in TABOR. I reached out to a few friends in Colorado and asked if they knew about TABOR. One did, one didn't, and the one who didn't told him about it was the property tax thing. He was like, oh, that, sure, yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah.
So they've heard about that, but why don't they actually know about it?
That's a great question. It's a very wonky thing to know about unless you're paying attention to government left and right. Like I said, it's really when people hear about TABOR, it's because there's an attack on it at the state legislature level. They're either trying to put something on the ballot to undermine TABOR, or there's a court case that comes up. And I think we've talked about this a couple times. When you hear TABOR, you go, what the heck is TABOR? So it's almost better to use the Taxpayers Bill of Rights in explaining it, because it really is something that protects the taxpayers. And when people hear that, they go, oh, this must be a good thing. And yeah, it is a great thing.
I would always be worried if you hear from the government, they're here to protect you. That's
yeah, I'm from the government and I'm here to protect.
Right. But right now, the reason that we're doing this is because there's a Proposition HH, which is one of several attacks that have happened to TABOR along the line. And I guess in a sense, what we're seeing is that there are certain people who are trying to take advantage of the public's ignorance of what TABOR is. So real quickly, what is HH?
Yeah, so HH is a piece of, really, we'll go back to what the legislature did this year, because the legislature is the one that put it on the ballot. It was this bill that they rammed through very last minute, the legislature, like the last dying weeks of session. And then the governor, Jared Polis, signed it. And basically what it does is it dangles this temporary tax cut that is very small, very, very small, on property taxes. Everybody hates property taxes. So it's this very small property tax cut in it dangles it out there, and what they offer in return, or what they get in return, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get through it a little bit, is this growth of the budget year over year. So it's a little wonky. You got to dive into how TABOR works a little bit. TABOR, the formula, every year says you can grow the budget by population plus inflation growth. So it's just the raw percentages. If you get a population growth of 1%, and a inflation growth of 2%, which would be great. I don't know if you checked inflation, but last time I checked it, it was like, 6% or something. But if you get 1% and 2% for both of those, that's the budget can grow 3%. Your tax collection and your budget can grow 3%.
Simple enough to understand.
Simple enough. Yeah. When people hear inflation plus or population plus inflation, they get all, that I don't know what that means. Well, it's really simple. It's just simple math. What the legislature wants to do is offer this property tax cut, quotations around that, in exchange for a 1% increase annually to their budget and tax collection. Over time, it could be this really, really, terrible thing where, so say to use our kind of numbers there, the 1 plus 2%, that could be 4% next year. And you might not think, okay, that's not a lot of government spending, but when I think our friends over at at one of the think tanks out there in Colorado, Ben Murrey, did some math on this, and it shows that in a decade from now, that's potentially $2 billion in foregone TABOR refunds that could have gone back to the taxpayers, and that's how when government collects tax revenue over their spending limit, then they have to return that money to the people. So that's potentially $2 billion a year that could have gone back to the taxpayers. $2
billion that the taxpayers of Colorado could have been spending on their homes, on their kids' education, on clothes, on food, on rent.
That was rightfully theirs to begin with.
But there is no limits. You're saying there are no limits on this, and they're just going to keep on pushing and pushing this. And I don't know. It makes me wonder, is like, how do they get away with it? Is it just because the people aren't that engaged?
Yeah. To an extent, it is the ignorance on what TABOR is, and I think it's good to do things like this, talk about what TABOR is, and break it down very simply, because the more that people know about it, the more they know how much of a good deal they're already getting, and how much of a raw deal certain things like, here's a very temporary, very small tax rate, property tax rate cut. What that really does short term, and how that undermines them long term.
Well, unfortunately, we definitely have proven to be a population that enjoys the short term fix over the long term crusade.
Exactly. And it's worth mentioning, a lot of people don't know this, but the spending constraint that TABOR has been over the last 30 years has really kept Colorado competitive when it comes to economic competitiveness with other states. We talk about that a lot in rich states, poor states, where you have Colorado maintaining a relatively good, or a very good actually, economic outlook ranking. At one point in time, they were number 2 overall, behind only Utah, because apparently nobody can overthrow Utah on that. Utah's just such a great place. But you have Colorado that was once number 2. This year, they reached their lowest ranking that is, I think, in the mid to low 20s, somewhere in there. So they're continuing to fall because of this incentive to continually increase progressive policy pushes that increase the size of government, that undermine fiscal responsibility, and really take more money from the taxpayers. Over the last 30 years, it's been TABOR that's been kind of standing in the way of that.
Well, it makes you wonder overall. It's not only the fact of that they're expanding how much they're spending, it's what are they actually spending all of this on. Crazy stuff. So things to look out for on the ballot this fall in Colorado. Okay, well, Nick, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you come back soon for another edition of Breakdown.